Most of you all are absolutely familiar with employee engagement. However, there's a new kid on the block, employee thriving. And in this video, we're going to talk about what's the difference and if you should be measuring employee thriving at all. So let's go into the history of employee engagement. The phrase was coined around the early 1990s or so, and it was essentially an evolution from employee satisfaction. What researchers wanted to know was how did employee satisfaction impact profitability and productivity? So hence employee engagement. The idea was when a person brought their full self to the organization and immersed more of their personality and identity into their work, it would increase productivity and create this idea of high engagement. But the origin of it all, the analytics of if you're satisfied, if you're happy, if you're engaged, to now if you are thriving, is essentially to give executives, business owners, shareholders, analytics and insights into the human assets of an organization to determine if the organization would be more profitable or not. So at the foundation of it all, it's about the almighty dollar. However, the tables are turning just a little bit. And as we're going to talk about with employee thriving, we are going to discuss the idea of employee well-being, which is a little bit more of an optimistic measurement and could steer away from pure profitability and steer more into whether organizations, executives, and managers are really caring about the well-being of their staff and workforce for the purpose of caring, or if that measurement is again geared toward just profitability and maximizing productivity. But who's to say you can't do both? Lately, Microsoft has been in the news because their head of people analytics and director of culture, listening, and engagement, essentially those two folks came together and said, employee engagement is dead to us. We are now going to measure employee thriving. And the bottom line is that employee engagement for Microsoft was not capturing the holistic narrative that they wanted to capture to help them make the decisions that they wanted to make. So employee engagement, they found, was just a little bit short-sighted and didn't give them the full picture of things like total hours worked, total hours collaborating with team members, total hours in deep work, and seniority. So we know that with employee engagement, seniority typically parallels with higher engagement. The higher you are in the organization, typically the more engaged you are because you have a little bit more autonomy. So employee thriving is giving Microsoft a deeper level of analytics into the work-life balance, total narrative of any of their employees, which employee engagement previously was not doing. And one of the things that they found was that you can be highly engaged, but have poor work-life balance. Or on the other side, you can have amazing work-life balance, but feel underutilized, feel like your career isn't going in the right trajectory, and that you don't have access to professional development and career growth opportunities that your colleagues may have access to. So now employee thriving is measuring all of that. And the way that Microsoft employees are talking about employee thriving is pretty interesting. They specifically mention a collaborative environment with teamwork with their colleagues, where the culture is inclusive. There is a high level of autonomy, flexibility, and support. And who doesn't want that, right? So the question is if you and your organization should be measuring employee thriving, which if you're going to get this inclusivity, this autonomy, and all of this great stuff, who wouldn't want to do that? But the interesting part is that Gallup, the organization that, in my opinion, really popularized the idea and term of employee engagement, also measures employee thriving, but they use a little bit of a different definition. So when you hear the phrase employee thriving, I want you to know that someone could be mentioning one or two different thought camps. And before I tell you more about how Gallup talks about employee thriving and how they measure it, let's just talk about some of the analytics and insights that organizations could benefit from when they use Gallup's definition of employee thriving. All right, here you go. So, for employees in Gallup's framework who are engaged but not thriving, they create a higher risk for organizations. Specifically, a 61% higher risk of burnout, 48% higher likelihood of daily stress, a 66% higher likelihood of daily worry, and double the daily rate of sadness and anger. Again, this is for employees who are engaged, which is the minority, but are not thriving, right? So you have all of these different emotional and social issues that pour from life into work, because we know you can't turn life off at 8 or 9 a.m. Life comes with you to work, whether we like it or not. And one of the other stats is that there was over 50% less days taken off for PTO due to illnesses or sicknesses. So in Gallup's framework, employees who are truly thriving are a benefit to the organization. They are taking less days off, they're more productive, and obviously they are higher engaged. So what's the difference in the Microsoft School of Thought and the Gallup School of Thought when it comes to measuring and defining employee thriving? And here is the main difference. Gallup takes more of a holistic life approach to this idea of employee thriving. And for me, I think about the difference of is thriving in work and thriving at work. So you're thriving in your work is more of the Microsoft model. It's not just being engaged in your work, but it's also thriving with these different metrics like collaboration and deep work and inclusivity and all of that good stuff. You are not just mentally and emotionally engaged in the work, you are thriving in your work environment. Versus the Gallup model, it is thriving in your life, and you're bringing that thriving to your work. So it's not just thriving in or at work, but it's really thriving in life as an individual and as a person. And you just bring that success and that vigor for life and some of the metrics that we're going to talk about in a moment to work with you. So again, it's a difference of thriving in your work and thriving at work because you're already thriving as a human being and as an individual. So the way that Gallup goes about measuring employee thriving is really interesting, and it reminds me of a lot of the life coaching principles that I used to use in my company some years ago. And the first question that they ask is, imagine you're on a ladder, 10 being the best life possible and 1 being the worst life possible for yourself. Where would you measure yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 if you were physically on one of the rungs of that ladder? And so what they found was that anyone ranking themselves at a 7 or above is thriving. And the second follow-up question is, if you imagine yourself on that ladder in the next 5 years, which number of that rung of the ladder would you be on? And again, between 7 and 8, they rank as a person thriving. And when you think about all of the factors that a person is considering when they think about how well you're achieving at life, you have access to capital, you have food, your safety, your psychological safety, your social status, your physical health, your emotional health. We're really digging into Maslow's hierarchy of needs here. And it's a robust conversation that a person is having in this inner dialogue to determine, where they are on this figurative ladder. But this is the measurement that Gallup is using to determine those measurements such as, burnout and not showing up to work and the daily stress, the worry, the sadness, the anger, all of those good things for those engaged employees. And the question on the table is, which school of thought should you subscribe to? And when it comes to the Microsoft model, obviously those things were fantastic. Collaborative environment, inclusive and autonomy and all of that good stuff. So what I want to do is shift the conversation more toward the Gallup model and talk about some pros and cons for implementing the Gallup school of thought if you were considering beginning to measure employee thriving in your organization. So, one of the first pros that I thought about was better data analytics allows for better planning. If you know that 38% of your organization has a 61% higher chance of burnout, that's going to give you and your team a runway to plan on how you should be thinking about your health coverage, how you should be thinking about staffing up, how you should be thinking about having consultants and contractors at close range just in case your internal team can't follow through with the work. You have so much data and insight if you are measuring this holistic idea of thriving. So with better data comes better planning, and with better planning generally comes better results. Another way or reason to think about why this holistic measurement of employee thriving is a good idea is that with those insights, you're able to take action on behalf of your staff in ways that maybe you couldn't take action without that data. So you're not only able to plan from an organizational standpoint, you're able to act on behalf of your staff and your organization. You're able to think about the types of coverage that you can have, not just to increase productivity, but to actually meet the needs of your workforce and your staff. You're able to think about the mental health resources you can provide if you actually know the statistics of your organization who are not thriving outside of work. That can help you decide if your compensation ranges are where they should be based on whether people are able to meet their daily needs or not, if they have access to the type of food and nutrition that they need. If the answer is no, by and large, that may say, hey, bump up the salary, or think about your profitability margins in ways that can support your staff so that you can continue to grow your organization. Another pro, I think, is the potential for increased morale. So when I think about a staff of maybe 1,000 people and they get a memo saying, we care about you guys so much. We really want to have better insights, not into how you're performing at work, but the overall life conditions you have, your overall life satisfaction, so that we can be equipped as an organization to meet your needs outside of 9 to 5, but from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. or however you want to, be cool with the numbers. That could go over very well. Oh, wow. My organization cares about me so much. They really want to know if I'm taking care of myself. They want to know if I'm working out because they might want to subsidize my gym membership. They want to know how my nutrition and access to groceries is. If I live in a food desert, just because they want to know what they can do to support me as an individual so that I can show up to be my best when I'm at work. Who doesn't want to be a part of an organization who thinks that way? However, on the other side, we're going to talk about some cons, and everything I said can be completely flipped upside down, and it can go over very poorly depending on how the message is spun and generally how your team accepts your organization saying, hey, we want to know how successful you think you are at life because we want to make business decisions about it. Wait, what? You got to be kidding me, right? So in general, that message just may not go over well because it may communicate this idea of corporate greed. The fact that maybe you just want to know how they're doing because you're planning on cutting the least happy 10% of your workforce because they're not going to contribute to growth, right? There can be a lot of mistrust in our organizations due to past corporate greed. So we have to be wary of how we're messaging in general, what our real objectives and goals and intentions are when trying to implement this holistic measurement of employee thriving. The second thing is that, who's to define what it means to be successful, at life? And who's to define what interventions I need as a full human being adult? And I just may not want the intrusion of my organization into my life. I might want a clear line between church and state. I may say I'm at a 4 on the success ladder. Maybe I'm happy with a 4. I don't need you to tell me that I shouldn't be happy with my 4, and I don't want you to tell me that I should be at the 7, or if I'm not, you're going to do this. Maybe it's just a little bit too much data for Big Brother to have access to. And then lastly, maybe the communication goes over well. Maybe you nail it. Maybe the PR and the internal campaign is fantastic and you just get low participation. So you can't promise that people are going to participate in something like this. And oh my goodness, so the fact that it could be voluntary, that's going to be a bomber as well. So we have some pros, we have some cons, and we have two schools of thought. The question of the day is, one, do you subscribe to the idea of measuring employee thriving? And if you do, is it thriving in your work, or is it thriving as an individual and bringing that thriving self to work? Let me know which one you think is best for your organization and how you're going to go about implementing.